So I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker, Molly Peacock. She's the author of 6 volumes of poetry, including The Second Blush and Cornucopia, New and Selected Poems. Molly Peacock, excuse me, you understand. Molly Peacock has been widely anthologized. Her poems appear in the Best of the Best American Poetry and the Oxford Book of American Poetry. She is former president of the Poetry Society of America and was co-creator of Poetry in Motion in New York City's public transportation system. She co-edited the anthology Poetry in Motion, 100 Poems from the Subways and Buses. Peacock is also the author of a memoir, Paradise Piece by Piece, where she explains her choice not to have children and the loneliness women often feel in dealing with social pressures concerning motherhood. Her other prose books include How to Read a Poem and Start a Poetry Circle, and she is the editor of a collection of essays, The Private Eye, Privacy in a Public World. Her essay, Passion Flowers in Winter, appears in the Best American Essays, and other essays have appeared in Elle, House and Garden, Creative Nonfiction, New York Magazine, and O, the Oprah Magazine. A biography entitled The Paper Garden, Mrs. Delany Begins Her Life Work at 72, was published in 2010 in Canada and in the US under the title The Paper Garden, An Artist Begins Her Life's Work at 72. This book is at once a biography of an extraordinary 18th century woman and a fascinating meditation on late life creativity. So please join me in welcoming Molly Peacock.
Thank you so much. It's a joy to be here. And I want to thank the Loft, to thank in particular Brian Malloy, who's done lots and lots of behind-the-scenes guidance for this morning. And I'd like to thank the library again, and I'm just going to give you a personal round of applause here. It means a great deal. Now, if you were wondering where late life creativity is, I can certainly say that this is one of the places in this room. If you look all around, you will see a group of people that as I'm looking at you, I see imaginations at work and queries and questions about what it means to go on in life as a creative individual. I'm a little bit curious about why you're all here. I'm just going to ask, I'm just going to say this. This is my guess. That even though you've accomplished much, there's still something you need to do. So I'm hearing by the murmurs that seems to be like the positive murmur of a happy beehive. Do you know what I mean? That sort of a little bee smile. I'm going to make one point this morning and a lot of smaller points. And when I get to the one point, it'll be perfectly obvious to you. And I'm going to divide this talk into 3 parts. I'm going to talk for a while, then I'm going to show you some pictures, and then I'm going to talk for a while again. I'm going to start off with a plant metaphor. Because my guess is, it looks like, at any rate, that there are gardeners in here, some nods, and that most of you know what a geranium is. Even if you don't know anything else, You probably could identify a geranium, a common pelargonium. But in the 18th century, a geranium was a rare thing indeed in England, where someone named Mary Granville Pendarvis Delany was living. But before I take you to the 18th century, where you will be fascinated and appalled at how many connections in your life you can make with the amazing Mrs. Delany, I just want to say that for those of you who know what a geranium is, if you lop off the growing tip of a geranium, what happens? You get side growth. And if you, I'm just taking the chance to just take a look at everybody. If you do that, the plant looks terrible for a while, especially if you really are savage about it. But then there are lots and lots of side nodes on the stem of a geranium, and those nodes put out side growth until you've got quite a bushy plant, and you get upward growth too. And I just want you to think about in your own lives that sense of the side nodes, that of potential that you have in your own growth pattern. We have a ridiculous idea of a human growth pattern as straight up. It doesn't work that way. Everyone in this room knows it doesn't work that way. But we struggle with a cultural idea that you go straight up, and the next cultural idea is then you go straight down. I'd like to get rid of all that this morning and just give you a botanical metaphor for your lives. That when growth is stopped in one place, all those side nodes open up. Now, just so hold that in your head. And then let me tell you a story about a woman and a geranium. But first, I'm going to read you. I'm going to read you the first paragraph of The Paper Garden. Mrs. Delany begins her life's work at 72. Imagine starting your life's work at 72. At just that age, Mary Granville Pendarvis Delany, born May 14th, 1700, died April 15th, 1788, a fan of George Friedrich Handel, a sometime dinner partner of satirist Jonathan Swift, a wearer of green-hooped satin gowns, and a fiercely devoted subject of blonde King George III, invented a precursor of what we know as collage. One afternoon in 1772, she noticed how a piece of colored paper matched the dropped petal of a geranium. After making that vital imaginative connection between paper and petal, she lifted the 18th century equivalent of an X-Acto blade. She'd have called it a scalpel or a pair of filigree-handled scissors, the kind that must have had a nose so sharp and delicate that you could almost imagine it picking up a scent. With the instrument alive in her still rather smooth-skinned hand, she began to maneuver, carefully cutting the exact geranium petal shape from the scarlet paper. Then she snipped out another, and another, and another, and another with the trance-like efficiency of repetition, commencing the most remarkable work of her life. 985 botanically accurate, life-size collages of flowers made out of hundreds of brightly colored bits, loops, dots, half moons of colored paper, all composed on dramatic black backgrounds. And that's what I'm going to stop in a little while and show you. I wrote a book trying to answer the question of how could a woman in her 8th decade invent an art form centuries before our art history books tell us Picasso and Matisse invented this art form in the 20th century. And what went on in this woman's life in the decades before that she suddenly up and did this? So that was the question that drove my book, and I used an image of hers to begin as a threshold into all of the various periods of her life, and that's what I'm going to show you, and use her life as a way to reconnoiter with our lives and our creative dilemmas. Now, I'm just going to go back and say that these flowers are on black backgrounds. And there she is, and she's 72. And I'm going to give you a really, really, really quick tour through her life as you give yourselves a quick tour through decades of your own life. And the first thing is, now we're going to just go back into childhood. Because what I decided to do, she left thousands of pages of letters. She was an older sister. Older siblings in this audience? I see, Okay, and then she had a disobedient younger sister. Younger siblings in this audience? Oh, okay, I see them. Well, she said to her sister, burn my letters. She didn't want anybody to find out anything. And her little sister didn't do it. And that is how we know about this remarkable individual today, because of that disobedient act that all you younger siblings know about. So I began to go through these letters to try to track all of the instances of creativity in Mrs. Delany's life, thinking, did they add up to anything? I mean, what was going on? Do you just like suddenly walk out on a stage at 72 and start doing a brand new art form? So I found that when she was 6 years old, she was sent to a little school. And there she learned how to cut out birds and flowers in silhouettes. And my guess is that everybody here is of an age when you were in school, perhaps a teacher cut out a silhouette of you. Is that, yeah, a few people are nodding, or a parent cut out a silhouette of you. And she had a friend who took one of the little things that she did and scampered off with it and gave it to her parents. And her parents were so impressed by the quality of this other, of their daughter's friend's work, that they framed it. Now, pretty soon, political circumstances are going to cause Mary Delany to be grabbed out of this school and taken away to the countryside to hide out with her family. But all of their lives, these two women who never saw each other beyond about the age of 8, heard about one another. And throughout her life, Lady Jane Douglas would comment to people who knew Mary Delany and say, I remember that wonderful work that you did. And Mary Delany would hear that. And I don't know how many people came here with a friend today. Well, there's 2 friends here. Oh, there's a few friends over there, a few friends over there, okay. Friendship plays a huge role in creativity in general and in particular in late life creativity. We have a benighted and ridiculous idea that people create alone, they create in solitude, they, that somehow some artistic impulse wells up in them and that they just do it in some sort of isolation. That's a romantic idea, and it's a wrong idea. Anybody who makes art needs a response. Emily Dickinson needed response as she sent her poems pinned to the aprons of her nephews and nieces who would go across to her sister-in-law's house to show them to her. Everybody needs response. It's not the same as fame, and I'll make that point again later. But just to give you that little bit. Then she went into a terrible period of her life after her family came out on the wrong side of the politics of the time. Her uncle gets thrown in jail. These are aristocrats, but they're minor aristocrats, and her father, although he had some social position, didn't have any money. So she didn't have any money. And so the problem with a girl, when you don't have any money, is how are you going to place her, a.k.a. get rid of her in some way. Finally, her uncle gets out of jail, and when they're hiding out in the country, her father creates almost like a little art colony for her. And so as you're thinking about yourselves, as you thought about yourselves at the age of 6 or 7 or 8, now think of yourselves as teenagers in middle school and beginning of high school. And her father created hours for her. So she had a certain hour when she practiced the spinet. She had hours when she did her embroidery. She had hours when she did her cut paperwork, when she drew, when she painted. She made a friend, and she had time when she could travel over the fields and meet this friend. And so there was a thriving creative life in her youth. My guess is, as I look at you, and I'm looking at you trying to look at you the way Mary Delany would. She was a noticer. She would notice your green ring and your green glasses. Okay, she would notice your scarf. She might count the buttons on your jacket. She could describe them. She'd know how many people in here are wearing glasses. She might have counted the steps that she took from the parking lot to the front door. She was just a noticer, a counter, a calibrator of things in life. She might notice there's a purple motif in this room. There's a purple sweater. There's a plaid with purple. There's another purple top. She might notice all of that, and part of that comes from being allowed as a child, or taking as a child, those moments for your own imagination. But this was to come to an end because she had an evil uncle. He's out of jail. He marries a wealthy woman, a really wealthy woman, and you can see her house on BBC Safari Park if you ever watch that. It's a huge place, and it's called Longleat. So they're partying at Longleat, and they've hired these musicians, and they're banqueting, and there's a great long table, and the doors at Longleat are way taller than the ceiling in this room. I mean, it's huge, and the big hall is right there as you come into these doors, and now there's a thunderstorm. They're all eating dinner. There's a great storm. Mary is 17, being invited out by her uncle. I'll bring you out into society, he says to her. And a great knock comes on the door. And the uncle gets up to answer the door. And there, in dripping wet, is a man, this 17-year-old Mary Granville's, there she's sitting there. He would have been her grandfather's age. So he's 61. We don't think that's very old at all now, but she, of course, did. And his belly is flopping over his belt. He's drunk. All right? He's wandering. He's drunk. We have in a letter, she says, he smelled of a vast quantity of snuff. So there are the port fumes, the beer fumes, the snuff fumes are coming off of him. His shirt is untucked, and the uncle embraces him and says, "Oh, Squire Pendarvis, come in, come in." Turns out he was a political ally of the uncle, and he comes in, and the uncle says, "Oh, I have a seat for you at our table, right here next to my 17-year-old niece, Mary." You know what's going to happen. Let's just let's sigh and say that it does happen. And people have said to me, "Why didn't you write a novel about Mrs. Delany?" And my answer to that is, I am too captivated by the truth. And if you put that in a novel now, it would sound like an imitation. It would sound like an imitation 19th century novel about the 18th century, but she was a realist. If she were in a novel, she would have said, "I won't marry the squire." But she wasn't in a novel. It's real life. So I invite everybody here to think about situations in your real life where you knew you had to do something. You were compelled to do it. You were forced to do it. You had to do it. You had no choice. So I'm moving you from these places of creativity that you've had to places where you've had no choice. She knew it. She wrote in a letter later on in her life, she said, "I was sacrificed." And indeed, they sacrificed her. They more or less sold her to this squire. And he took her off to a castle. He actually had a castle, a dank, decrepit castle, as decrepit as he was. And she got to the castle. She saw some light coming down the hall and ran down the hall toward this light. And it turns out the light was coming from a hole in the ceiling. So she spent from the next 10 years of her life, from 17 to 26 or 27, was the worst period of her life. And there's very, very little evidence of her creativity during this time. I just invite you to think of times in your life when you have been constrained, when you haven't produced very much, because you've had things that you've had to do. There have been demands on you. Because in anyone's life, even in the most privileged or the most exceptional life, there are times when everything is drawn out of you. All of your energy is drawn out of you. You have to put out and put out and put out. She had to read to him in cold rooms because he had gout, and there couldn't be a fire lit. I'm just all these little tasks. I won't go on about it, and except to say, he died. Yeah. And her parents felt that and her aunt felt that she should get married right away again. No way. She'd paid her dues, and she turned down 10 different suitors. Over the next 20 years, she turns down 10 different marriage proposals, including one from John Wesley, creator of Methodism. She has a flirtation with Jonathan Swift. I won't get into it. She has a bust-up of a relationship with Lord Baltimore. I won't get into it. She has a very, very, very close, possibly romantic relationship with an Irish woman. I won't get into it. So think about all of your bust-ups of relationships. Think of your romances. Think of how things may have been soured. Think of your embarrassments. Think of your need for money. She didn't get the old squire's fortune. She didn't give him any children. She didn't get the castle. She got 300 pounds a year, which wasn't nothing, but it certainly wasn't the kind of income that her friends had. And I'm just, this is a period of time when she watches Hogarth paint a portrait of her friend and gets painting tips. She's watching other art be made. She, through circumstances, becomes a friend of Handel's and goes to his dress rehearsals. She hears the famous sopranos of her time. So take a tour of your own life as an audience member. Thinking of your own life as a witness to art being made or art simply being given to you from a stage or from the walls of a museum. And she entered into that time. She also had to find a job, but she had very, very limited choices in terms of finding a job. I mean, she couldn't go out and start a tech company or anything. So the only kind of job she could get was maybe getting a court appointment, being appointed to, say, being a little companion to a prince or a princess, where she'd get a clothing allowance, they'd feed her, she'd get rooms at the court, but the politics were never right. However, she had to show up. It's like, imagine having job interview after job interview after job interview. I think there are people in here who've had this experience. Only to get this job, she had to be dressed. And so she had to show up at court sometimes twice a day. And getting dressed for court was kind of like getting dressed for a wedding, with layers and layers of undergarments that then finally the overgarment of the mantua was placed upon her. And she had to float into these rooms and never, of course, turn her back to royalty. So she was always walking like this, because she had big side hoops, okay? They were strapped on her. She's walking like this. She's smiling, okay? And she has to buy these clothes. So she decides that she can make her own. And she creates these dresses that have black backgrounds and botanically accurate flowers embroidered on them. Stow that in your mind. Life turns. A friend of Jonathan Swift shows up, not well born, doesn't have a lot of money, but he has a house in Ireland, and she likes him. And she takes a chance, and she flouts her family and sails on a ship to Ireland over the Irish Sea, where these two newlyweds, she's 43, and he's 68, and are seasick together. for the first days of their marriage on this boat heaving across the Irish Sea to Dublin, and where they create a garden together. A fabulous garden, one of the first picturesque gardens in Ireland, where she starts painting in oils because he encouraged her, and where she starts getting interested in all of the Irish weavers who are making these materials and fabrics, and where she begins writing to her sister because she's now separated from her sister. And suffering that weird kind of loss where someone is alive but far away. And my sense is that everyone in this room has suffered all kinds of losses. You don't get to a certain period in life without having people leave you, without leaving people, without suffering some severe losses, without suffering severe health challenges. That's what it means to go on in life. So she's there, and she has those health challenges, and so does her husband. And her sister who has had a more conventional life, and she's gotten married, and she's had 4 children, and keeps up this correspondence. And yes, they're sisters, and they're also friends. Those of you who have sisters with whom you didn't quite manage to make a friendship can feel jealous of this. And those of you who have sisters or brothers or siblings where you are friends understand the tremendous boost of reassurance that comes from this. So her sister dies, but she doesn't have time to mourn because her husband is in huge legal problems and is involved in a terrible lawsuit. It goes on for 7 years, and his health deteriorates, and she's got to take care of him. And they're going to Bath to take the waters. They're trying to find lost evidence. It goes on in this terrible disintegration, and then he dies. And she's 68, and she has had a great 25 years with him. And she's kept her friends all of her life. I'm telling you this story of loss, of being compelled and forced to do things, of moments of creativity that don't seem to add up to much. What's a dress? A garden? A little piano playing. All of these things, they're pieces. And I'm just inviting you to think of pieces in your own life. Pieces that are lost, pieces that that just have a little sparkle to them every once in a while, that you wake up. And I'm going to bring you back to that table where Mary Delany made an imaginative connection. Now, it is rare in a creative life that we can pinpoint a moment of someone's exact imaginative, what can I say, an imaginative bonanza. She's such a wreck after Patrick Delany dies that her handwriting begins to deteriorate. I don't know about you, but my handwriting has deteriorated considerably, but hers was beautiful. She felt it was the window to the soul, and you can see it shake. And you can, and she's writing, and she blots the ink. And she's apologizing. She says, well, I just can't, I don't have time to write this over. I'm just going to you'll have to accept this from me. And she has a friend one of those lifelong friends. She had a talent for friendship, who happened to have married extremely well. She was a duchess. She was very well-to-do. She had her own private zoo animals walking around the lawn. She had her own private greenhouse. Not only did she have her own private cleric, she had her own private botanist. And she writes her friend a letter, and she says, look, stop your indecision. Take the money that you have from your husband, buy yourself this little house in London, and come and live with me at my estate for 6 months of the year. And so she does this. And she's at this estate where the Duchess has collected this geranium. But she's in a state of mourning where she's so confused that she actually gets lost wandering around. This is a pretty big place. You could actually get lost there. And our friend even starts worrying, like, geez, I don't know whether I can leave her alone. And there she is. And her friend, whose name is Margaret, she said, let me take you off to this garden. So they go off to this neighbor garden. And there she gets stung on the foot by a gnat. That's what she said, something, and her foot swells up to several times its size. This is not a good thing to happen in the 18th century. And the doctor says, okay, take her home, and she has to have her foot up. And this is a busy woman. I am just thinking that I've just walked out of camera range. I'm so sorry. I've been doing that, and he's been so patient. He hasn't even waved up there. Well, what can I say? I feel quite connected with you, so I'm walking around here. So there she's got with this foot, and she's an extremely busy person, as are all of you. I just want to congratulate you actually for pulling yourselves together and getting here this morning. It's an effort, right? It's an effort. And she was the kind of person who had tremendous demands on her and tremendous demands on her life. I mean, she was a preacher's wife. I mean, she was available 500% of the time to every congregant who wanted it. It's not like they called first. There wasn't any telephone, just show up. I mean, she was in constant company her whole life. So there she is, busy, 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 and they say, you have to be still. You have to sit with your foot up. I invite you to think of a still moment in your lives. Even in the last 2 days, perhaps sitting in this chair this morning is your first still moment for the last couple of days. And to entertain her, they put around her, quote unquote, my employments and amusements. Her embroidery tools, her silhouette papers, her watercolors. They're on the table. And she is in a state of retrospection, as we all understand, any of us who have lost anything. From the moment you lose a toy as a child, a toy that then is irretrievable. You remember that torn stuffed bear you might have lost? Through the loss of a person who's meant everything to you. It causes you to look back on your life. And the longer you have lived, the greater the depth of looking back becomes. And in a society such as ours, where we are in constant forward motion, the retrospective position is less valued. But there she was, thinking back on her life, in this place where she had to be still. Still enough so that when her friend put this geranium in front of her to entertain her as an exotic thing, you know, I don't know what we would put, even orchids we get in the supermarket now, so I'm not quite sure what exotic plant we could compare this to. And that's when she was still enough to watch a petal drop and notice that she had a red piece of paper and just pick up those scissors and start assembling things. And her friend comes in and screams, "What have you done to my geranium?" And she says, "No, oh, no, I haven't ruined the plant." She said, "I think I have invented a new way of looking at flowers." And she knows it. She knows that moment. She doesn't know it big. I've invented something huge. She doesn't know it in that way. She just knows that a little switch has been flipped. A little something has happened. And there are little switches in all of our lives. Sometimes you can almost hear it. You can feel it. You can just go, oop. Or you can look back on your life and go, oh, that was the day. That was a moment. Not always. Sometimes it's quite blurred. But sometimes you can just kind of get it. So in this atmosphere of loss and individual moments of imagination, she comes to this place. It is a place, I think, that anyone with an imagination can come to. And now I'm going to make my point. An artist said to me, well, if circumstances had been different for Mrs. Delany, she would have created collage a lot earlier in her life. You know, I mean, if she hadn't had that terrible marriage, if she hadn't had all these obligations, she didn't have children, but she was in charge of a lot of children. She brought up a niece. She had various godchildren who lived with her. I mean, so this is a big, full household. I thought, could that be true? Could she have done this when she was 25, or 35, or 45? I have to tell you that 420 footnotes later, I can testify that she could not have done this at any other moment in her life. It doesn't happen that way. It doesn't happen that way. It couldn't have been done any earlier than 72. All of her life accumulated toward that time. Everything that she had done, including all of her mistakes, all of her embarrassments, all of the times when she was trapped, all of that went into that 8th decade that she entered into, because her husband died when she's 68. Finally, she takes 4 years. Well, like, we're supposed to get over losses, right? I mean, 4 years of mourning, please. Happily, she lived in an era before Prozac, and they just let her weep it out for 4 years, and so at that point, when she's 72. She starts this, but it's the encouragement of her friend. Once her friend realizes that she hasn't wrecked the plant, her friend said, "Whoa, this is amazing," and she thinks, "Gee, maybe I could do another one." And she thinks, gee, maybe I could do another one after that. Because there's something so restoring about making, simply making. I do not know how people process their lives without making something. And that means, making a tablecloth or making a poem. It's the activity of human expression and making that I think defines us and defines every person in this room. She did this from enforced stillness. That is to recreate a childhood atmosphere of imagination. When you have to remain still, you get bored a little bit. And it's very hard to get bored a little bit in these United States in 2012, okay? Because there's a lot of noise. There's a lot going on. But that replicates the childhood imagination. So there she is in that enforced stillness, coming to this place. And I'm just going to stop here, and I'm going to show you some slides about what she did. And I had a pointer, but I left it in the green room. So I'm just going to pretend I have a pointer. All right, and I'm going to zip through this. Oh, we're going to turn all the lights off. Here we are. There she is in her 40s. There she is at 82, looking pretty good, I think, for an 82-year-old. Here is her passion flower. And can we cut all the lights? Or is this going to make the videographer even more exasperated than I've already made him? We can't cut all the lights. This is it? This is it. Okay. Take a look at this. This is not painted. It is not painted. This is 234 pieces of paper. Whoa! It's incredible. They're just incredible. Here's a detail. There you can see. I know. See all those little white pieces? All individual pieces of paper. It's all paper. It's all paper. Here's her first geranium, right down there. And you can see it looks like a scrapbook. It's just something that she was collecting, just like a scrapbook. Just some silhouettes that she cut in her 60s. This is not from her childhood. Here's a detail. This is a silhouette cut out of white paper and pasted on black. It's a reverse cut. Ugh. This is a woman who did everything the hard way. Here is what we would call this a creeping forget-me-not, but she called it a hound's tongue. And this, you can't really see this very well, but it's a real leaf that she pasted. So there's a real leaf there since 1776. We were busy having a revolution over here, and she was busy having a creative revolution. Here is her damask rose, and right here is an insect bite. There's an insect bite cut into that leaf, and I use that image to begin the chapter where her evil uncle bites into her life. There's a detail. You can see it a little bit better here. 73 pieces of paper in that flower. There's her sister. There's her nodding thistle. As you can see, it looks like a dancing lady. She called them her ladies. That's, of course, during her period of life with the Pendarvis at the castle. She became Thistly. Her fabulous opium poppy. It's just spectacular. Take a look at that. It's all paper. I know it looks painted, but but that is a fineness of observation. And yet they're messy. Here's a Canada lily. She did North American specimens. You know, there's a whole fascinating history of how these specimens got to England, which I'm not going to derail us on because we're on late life creativity here. Here's her fabulous handwriting. Made me improve my own. There's the Dean, the lovely Patrick Delany, and her Grand Magnolia. And you can see she used any kind of paper that she was available, anything at her hand. She didn't care. Whatever it was, she used it. They're sexual, okay? There's a lusciousness to them. And it is not the sexuality of someone in her 20s or 30s or 40s, but the sensuous nature of someone, the sensuous apprehension of the world in her 70s and 80s. She did these for 10 years, from she was 72 to 82. Here's my favorite. It is just a regular old climbing pea vine, an everlasting pea. But check this out. Here's her scissors. Isn't that great? I had a lot of fun doing this, and I was totally overwhelmed at the same time. Take a look at that. Couldn't Matisse have done that? Now that's a blow up of that's about 100 times blown up from the size that it actually is. But I'm just giving you an idea of the abstraction. Oh, here's Ruth Hayden, her descendant, her great niece, who befriended me and took me in and told me her life story, which was amazing because she too decided to tackle something big in her life after the age of 50, and I put her story in the book. Here's my mother. Okay, there's a bit of my mother's story in the book, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. But there she is in 1938. Another a common plant, but from North America that she cut out with actual plant material. Surviving, that leaf surviving since 1777. And here is her fantastic, we'd call it a Chinese lantern, but, and this is botanical material overlaid on the paper. Well, I know, it's wow. It's amazing. She never intended them to be hung on a wall. That's a plant named after her friend, because, and you can see here, the pieces are bigger. She's really starting to lose her eyesight. She had a goal of doing 1,000. She reached 985. Now, I'm going back to my main point. She couldn't have done it any earlier. There isn't a person in this room who has something that they feel that they've wanted to do for years, who was perhaps ready to do it earlier. One of the great things about Delany's life is that she relieves us of our guilt. The guilt that we should have done something before. Oh, if only. If only I hadn't have met so-and-so and gone off into this, I slipped out of my, I did it again. This is going to be some online speech where the speech maker, takes a little trip and there's a blank wall. What can I say? Thank you. Thank you for indulging me. And there is no one in this room or perhaps any room of people over 50 that doesn't have some regret about their what they've done with their lives. But I say in this book, who doesn't hold out the hope of starting a memorable project at a grand old age? A life's work is always unfinished and requires creativity till the day a person dies. Even if you've managed major accomplishments throughout your life and don't really need a model for making a mark, you do need one for enriching an ongoing existence. Every project begins or has inside it the needle in the heart that drove the person to do it. And that picture of my mother is my needle in my heart that drove me as a poet. I'm not a scholar. I'm not a historian. I'm not an art historian. I was completely and utterly overwhelmed doing this book and doing this project, and I could not have done it earlier in my life. I say to you that my mother died at the age that Mary Delany began her great work. And my mother shut down her own creativity and her own making. She wasn't much of a maker. I had a grandmother who was a great craftsperson and did all kinds of crafts. But my mother came up at a time when basically to leave the farm and to leave all of that behind was, to embrace a new life. And she was a great model to me, my mother, in many, many ways. She was a woman who could whip open a car hood and fix a car. This was, and she had a fierceness about her, and she made decisions in her life that allowed me to make decisions in mine. But as she aged, and shut down in the way that she did, I began looking for other models. I kept thinking, what am I going to do? And I am accomplished. I've done a lot of artwork. I've written a lot of books. It doesn't. I'm not saying that it doesn't matter, but people's lives go in stages, and no matter what, you're always thinking about what you're going to do at that next stage, especially in a culture that believes somehow or another that you're flaking away like these flower specimens. And what is it that's going to engage you? And who are you at these various stages? Yes, a core of us remains the same, but we do change. There's side growth. There are all of those nodes that do spring into life, sometimes unbeknownst to us, but we have them. You all have them. And so when I first saw this work in 1986. All right, so that's a long time ago. Not so long. The fun of getting into the 18th century is realizing how contiguous time is. And that's the beauty of writing a memoir, if anybody in here has ever written a memoir or intends to. Your memoir places you in time, and you become part of a continuum of time. And it's a delicious thing. It's like tracing your genealogy, for those of you who do that. It places you in a chain of human beings and a chain of events. So with this sense of always looking for role models, we need role models all of our lives.
You know, and there comes a time when a good dead role model is you know, I mean, you don't have to have a living one. A nice role model from the past will do. That everybody says to themselves at various points, well, I've grown in this way now. Now what? Now what? And do I have the nerve? Do I have the health? Do I have the strength? And I would say that the challenge of late life creativity is to invite the fear of doing something new into your life. I'll give you a new O word. Overwhelmed. There is nothing that repeats the energy of youth than being overwhelmed. If you take on a project that overwhelms you, you take on the thrill of learning more than you possibly think you can, and that repeats your childhood as well. I spent my whole childhood overwhelmed, you know, by school, all the things I had to learn, all the things I had to do. I always felt they were going too fast for me. And I mean, I managed, obviously, but that sense of something big, you know, you have the teacher assigns you a research paper and it's huge. All of those things. And Ruth Hayden, when she, who didn't even have a high school education, when she discovered her ancestor, began going to the British Museum and looking at these works, and through circumstances found her letters and decided to write a book about her that's still in print from the British Museum. She was 55 when she decided to do this. She was a depressed, post-war British housewife with 2 children, dragging herself through her days, and she discovered her ancestor. And I tell her story in the paper garden as well, because there's a multiplicity of ways in which people connect with things and then undertake something big. And to undertake that means to be ambitious. Okay, Mrs. Delany had a goal of 1,000, and she was a perfectionist. I can't say that she wasn't, and I see there are a few perfectionists lingering around here in this audience, and you've got one in front of you too. And she said, I'm going to do 1,000 of these. But she also knew that her eyesight was debilitating enough that when she got to 985, she said, you know, these other 15, they're not going to be as good. It's not going to work out. I'm having a lot of trouble doing this. And she understood that a goal is not a vision. She had her vision. And it's not the same. She did not feel in her letters that she fell short in some way. Let her relieve you of guilt, as she has me. Let her relieve you of an idea of falling short. She did what she could do, and she was engaged in it over and over and over again. I'm going to give you 2 more words. Ambition and amateur. Mrs. Delany was an amateur. She undertook this completely as an amateur. She was surrounded by so-called professionals. Sir Joseph Banks, who created Kew Gardens, was a great botanist. He was at the Duchess's table. George Dionysius Errett, the great botanical illustrator, he was at the Duchess's table. He was Linnaeus's illustrator. I mean, she was surrounded by so-called professionals, but she was an amateur. In an age when doing something as an amateur was not frowned on. We professionalize everything. You know, I'm telling you, if you pick up a guitar and play a few strums, somebody's going to expect you to book Carnegie Recital Hall, you know, the next month so that you can get out there. The ambition of wanting to do 1,000 of these is not the same as the fame seeking of thinking you have to book Carnegie Recital Hall. There is a sense of limitation in age that is a delicious one. It's not a cage. It's just a boundary. To see the shape of your life and to see the shape of things to come is simply to recognize boundaries. Don't we all need boundaries in our lives? A boundary just encloses energy. That's all a boundary does, is when you see something define, it defines, and it encloses energy. Now that seems contradictory to being overwhelmed, but when you have energy enclosed, it's intense, it's overwhelming. Just remember, she couldn't have done it at any other time. And you, whatever you have to do, you couldn't have done it at any other time than right now, today, this weekend, as you engage in these workshops. You all have things to do. Nobody in here has to go into a writing class and get an assignment from the teacher about what to write about. You know what you want to write about. It's welling up inside you. You have it. And you can do it. Being thoroughly unprepared, you think, but being prepared by your entire lives. Thank you very much.